The West African sun blazed mercilessly over Ouagadougou as President Ibrahim Traoré stepped out of the presidential palace, his polished black shoes clicking against the marble steps. The morning press briefing had been routine. Discussions about infrastructure development, foreign aid negotiations, and the upcoming economic summit. But as he emerged into the scorching daylight, surrounded by his ever-vigilant security detail, something extraordinary awaited him. The crowd outside the palace gates was larger than usual, their voices creating a low hum of excitement and confusion. Journalists jostled for position, cameras ready, sensing that something newsworthy was about to unfold. But Traoré's attention was immediately drawn to one figure standing apart from the chaos, a woman who commanded attention without saying a word. She was statuesque, perhaps 5 feet 8 inches tall, with smooth ebony skin that seemed to glow in the harsh sunlight. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant twist, and she wore a flowing white dress that seemed almost ethereal against the dusty backdrop of the capital city. But it was her eyes that truly captured Traoré's attention, dark, intense, and filled with a determination that was both captivating and unsettling. In her manicured hands, she held a handmade sign that read in bold black letters, "I came 6,000 miles for you, Ibrahim Traoré. Marry me." The crowd had formed a semicircle around her, whispering in Mooré, French, and English. Some laughed nervously, others stared in disbelief. Children pointed and giggled while their parents tried to usher them away. But the woman remained perfectly still, her gaze locked on Traoré, unmoved by the spectacle she had created. "Sir, we need to get you inside," whispered Malik Ouedraogo, Traoré's chief of security, his hand instinctively moving toward his concealed weapon. This woman could be dangerous, but Traoré raised his hand, signaling for calm. Something about this woman intrigued him. In his 5 years as president, he had encountered countless people seeking favors, money, political positions, or simply a moment of his time. But never had someone traveled halfway around the world with such a bold, public declaration. "Let her through," Traoré commanded, his deep voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. His security team exchanged worried glances, but they knew better than to argue with their president. They parted reluctantly, creating a pathway between Traoré and the mysterious woman. She walked toward him with measured steps, her head held high, her eyes never leaving his face. The crowd fell silent, sensing the gravity of the moment. Even the journalists stopped their chattering, their cameras now focused intently on this unprecedented encounter. When she was close enough to touch him, she stopped and extended her hand in greeting. "My name is Maya Taylor," she said, her American accent unmistakable, her voice strong and clear. "I've traveled from New York City to become your second wife." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Traoré's advisors shifted nervously. Behind him, cameras flashed frantically. The crowd erupted in whispers and gasps. Traoré studied her face, searching for signs of mental instability, desperation, or deception. Instead, he found only unwavering conviction. "Maya Taylor," he repeated, slowly, testing the name on his tongue. "You realize that you cannot simply appear at a presidential palace and demand marriage. This is not how these things work." Maya stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "I know exactly how unusual this is, Mr. President. I know that rational people don't leave their entire lives behind to pursue a man they've never met. But sometimes, love doesn't follow rational rules." "Love." Traoré's eyebrows rose. "You speak of love for someone you know nothing about." "I know more than you think," Maya replied, her voice dropping to an almost intimate whisper despite the crowd surrounding them. "I know that you grew up in poverty in Gorcy, that your father died when you were 12, and that your mother sold vegetables in the market to pay for your education. I know that you joined the military at 18 and worked your way up through sheer determination. I know that you led the revolution not for power, but because you couldn't bear to watch your people suffer under corruption any longer. Traoré's jaw tightened. This information was all public knowledge, but the way she spoke about it, with reverence rather than mere recitation, caught him off guard. I also know, Maya continued, that you visit the children's hospital every month without media coverage. I know that you donated your first year's presidential salary to build schools in rural villages. I know that you cry when you think no one is watching, because the weight of leading a nation is almost too much for one man to bear. The last statement sent a chill down Traoré's spine. That was not public knowledge. How could she possibly know such intimate details about his private struggles? You still don't know me, he said firmly, though his voice lacked the conviction it had moments before. Tears began to well in Maya's eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. Then let me know you. Give me the chance to prove that my feelings are real, that my commitment is genuine. I'm not leaving Burkina Faso until you agree to consider my proposal. The crowd was growing restless, and Traoré could see his security team becoming increasingly agitated. This spectacle needed to end before it became an even bigger diplomatic and media nightmare. Miss Taylor, he said formally, I appreciate your dedication. But this conversation cannot continue in such a public setting. If you are serious about this proposal, then we will discuss it properly, privately. Maya's face lit up with hope. You'll meet with me? I will give you 1 hour, Traoré conceded, immediately regretting the decision even as he made it. 1 hour to explain yourself properly. After that, you will return to America and resume your life. Thank you, Maya breathed, and for the first time since their encounter began, she smiled, a radiant expression that transformed her entire face. As Traoré's security team ushered Maya toward the palace, he caught Malik's disapproving stare. Sir, this is highly irregular, Malik muttered under his breath. Everything about this morning has been highly irregular, Traoré replied. 1 hour, Malik. What harm can come from 1 hour? As they would soon discover, sometimes 1 hour is all it takes to change everything. The presidential palace's interior was a study in contrasts, traditional African art and textiles combined with modern furniture and technology. Maya found herself seated in an elegant receiving room, its walls adorned with masks and sculptures from across West Africa, while floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the carefully manicured gardens outside. Despite the opulent surroundings, Maya felt like she was sitting in a courtroom awaiting judgment. Her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them in her lap, the magnitude of what she had just done beginning to sink in. Meanwhile, in his private office down the hall, Traoré paced behind his desk while Malik pulled up everything he could find. About Maya Taylor on his laptop. Maya Gabriel Taylor, age 28, born in Detroit, Michigan, Malik read aloud. MBA from Columbia University. Currently employed as a senior consultant at McKinsey & Company in Manhattan. Parents deceased. Car accident when she was 21. No siblings. Clean criminal record. No red flags in her financial history. What about romantic relationships? Traoré asked, though he wasn't sure why that information mattered to him. Currently engaged to Darius Monroe, heir to the Monroe Hotel empire. The engagement was announced 6 months ago in the New York Times Society pages. The wedding was scheduled for next month at the Plaza Hotel. Traoré stopped pacing. Was scheduled? According to social media posts from friends and family, the engagement was called off abruptly last week. No explanation given publicly. So she's running from a failed relationship, Traoré concluded. Using me as some kind of rebound fantasy. Sir, with respect, it doesn't matter what her motivations are. You cannot seriously be considering entertaining this woman's proposal. Traoré turned to face his longtime friend and advisor. And why not? Malik's eyes widened. Sir, you're the president of Burkina Faso. You can't marry some random American woman who showed up at your door. Think about the political implications, the security concerns, the media circus this would create. I'm aware of my position, Malik, Traoré replied coolly. But I'm also a man, and it's been 2 years since Aminata died. Perhaps it's time I considered the possibility of companionship again. The mention of Traoré's late wife brought a heavy silence to the room. Aminata had died of cancer just 6 months after Traoré assumed the presidency. They had been childhood sweethearts, married for 15 years, and her death had left him devastated and alone. Aminata would want you to be happy, Malik said, gently. But she would also want you to be wise. Promise me you'll be careful. Traoré nodded, then straightened his shoulders. 1 hour, Malik. I promised her 1 hour. When Traoré entered the receiving room, he found Maya standing by the window, her profile silhouetted against the afternoon light. She had removed her shoes and was standing barefoot on the Persian carpet, a gesture that seemed both intimate and vulnerable. Beautiful view, she said without turning around. Yes, it is, Traoré agreed, though he found himself looking at her rather than the gardens. Maya turned to face him, and he could see that she had been crying, not dramatically but quietly, the way people cry when they're trying to hold themselves together. Thank you for agreeing to see me, she said, gesturing toward 2 chairs arranged facing each other. I know how crazy this must seem. They sat down, and Traoré studied her more carefully in the privacy of the room. She was even more beautiful up close, but it was her intelligence that struck him most. Her eyes were alert, thoughtful, processing, everything around her with the speed of someone accustomed to high-stakes decision-making. Tell me the truth, Maya, he said. Why are you really here? Maya took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. The simple answer is that I fell in love with you. I know that sounds impossible, falling in love with someone you've never met. But it happened gradually, over months of following your story, your speeches, your policies. And the complicated answer? The complicated answer is that I was engaged to a man who saw me as a trophy, a business asset, rather than a person. Darius Monroe is wealthy, powerful, and charming when he wants to be. But he's also controlling, manipulative, and cruel. He wanted to marry me not because he loved me, but because I fit the image he wanted to project. Traoré leaned back in his chair. So you ran away from an arranged marriage to propose an arranged marriage to me? No, Maya said firmly. This isn't about arrangement or convenience. 6 months ago, I watched a video of you visiting a refugee camp on the border with Mali. There was a little girl, maybe 5 years old, who had been separated from her parents. She was crying, terrified, alone. And you knelt down in the dirt, ruining your suit, and you held her until she stopped crying. You promised her that you would help find her family, and you stayed there for 3 hours until you did. Traoré remembered that day vividly. The girl's name was Fatou, and she had reminded him of his own daughter, the daughter he and Aminata had never been able to have. That wasn't a photo opportunity, Maya continued. There were no cameras, no press. You did it because it was the right thing to do. That's when I knew that you weren't like other politicians. You weren't like other men. You were someone I could love, someone I could spend my life supporting and standing beside. But you don't know me, Traoré protested. You've seen curated moments, public appearances. You don't know about my flaws, my failures, my doubts. Maya leaned forward, her eyes intense. Then tell me about them. Tell me about the nightmares you have about the people who died during the revolution. Tell me about how you blame yourself. For every economic problem, every death from preventable disease, every child who goes to bed hungry. Tell me about how you stand on your balcony at 3 in the morning wondering if you're strong enough to lead this country. Traoré's breath caught in his throat. How could she possibly know these things? How? He whispered. Because I've been studying you for months, Maya admitted. Not just your public statements and policies, but your body language during difficult interviews, the pauses in your speeches when you're fighting back emotion, the way your jaw tightens. When journalists ask about casualties, I've watched every video, read every transcript, analyzed every photograph. I know you better than you think. That's not knowing someone, Traoré said, though his voice lacked conviction. That's surveillance. Maybe it started that way, Maya conceded. But it became something more. It became love. Deep, real, genuine love for who you are as a person, not just as a leader. Before Traoré could respond, there was a sharp knock on the door. Malik entered, his face pale and urgent. Sir, we have a problem, he announced. Maya's hotel room was just broken into. Whoever did it was specifically looking for her passport and travel documents. The blood drained from Maya's face. What? That's impossible. No one knows I'm here. Traoré stood immediately, his protective instincts kicking in. What else? The hotel security cameras were disabled 30 minutes before the break-in. This was professional, sir. Someone with resources and connections. Maya's hands began to shake. Darius, she whispered. It has to be Darius. The man you were engaged to? Traoré asked. He swore he would ruin me when I broke off our engagement. He said I would never be able to hide from him, that his reach was longer than I could imagine. Malik's phone buzzed, and he checked the message. His face grew even more grim. Sir, there's more. Darius Monroe just landed at Ouagadougou Airport. His private jet touched down 20 minutes ago. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Maya's romantic gesture had just become something far more dangerous. He followed me, Maya breathed, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Ibrahim. I never meant to bring trouble to your door. Traoré moved to her side instinctively, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. You're not leaving this palace until we understand what we're dealing with. Sir, Malik interjected, I strongly advise against getting more involved in this situation. If this Monroe character has the resources to track someone halfway around the world, he's not someone we want to antagonize. But Traoré's decision was already made. Whatever Maya's reasons for coming to him, she was now under his protection, and Ibrahim Traoré had never abandoned anyone who sought his help. Double the security detail, he commanded. I want to know everything about Darius Monroe within the hour. And Maya. She looked up at him with tear-filled eyes. You're staying here tonight. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. Darius Monroe cut an imposing figure as he stepped off his private jet at Ouagadougou Airport. At 35, he had the kind of polished confidence that came from never being told no and never having to worry about money. His tailored Italian suit remained unwrinkled despite the long flight, and his platinum Rolex caught the late afternoon sunlight as he adjusted his silk tie. Behind him, two men in identical black suits followed closely, his personal security team, ex-military contractors who had been with him for years. They moved with the fluid precision of professionals, their eyes constantly scanning the area for potential threats. Sir, one of them said quietly, the car is waiting. Darius nodded curtly and made his way toward the black Mercedes S-Class that waited on the tarmac. But instead of heading toward the city center where most visitors would stay, the car turned toward the government district. Back at the presidential palace, Malik burst into Traoré's office with a tablet in his hands, his face troubled. Sir, we've got a problem. Darius Monroe didn't come here just to retrieve Maya. Look at this. He placed the tablet on Traoré's desk, showing flight records and passenger manifests. Monroe's jet didn't just carry his security team. He brought 3 journalists from major American news networks, 2 lawyers specializing in international extradition, and a representative from the U.S. Embassy in Ghana. Traoré studied the information, his jaw tightening. He's not here for a personal matter. He's here for a public relations war. It gets worse, sir. In the past hour, 3 major news networks have started running stories about Maya. They're calling her a fugitive American socialite who fled to Africa to escape embezzlement charges. Embezzlement? Traoré's eyebrows shot up. What embezzlement? Malik swiped to another screen, showing news headlines from American outlets. Socialite Maya Taylor accused of stealing $5 million from fiancé's company. Desperate woman flees. To African palace after theft allegations. Monroe Hotel heir seeks justice for stolen millions. This is all fabricated, Traoré said immediately. Maybe, Malik replied. But Monroe has documentation. Bank statements, transfer records, witness statements. If even half of it is real. Sir? A guard appeared in the doorway. Minister Diallo is here to see you. She says it's urgent. Fatima Diallo, Burkina Faso's Minister of Justice, strode into the office moments later. She was a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, known for her rigid adherence to international law and her ambition to be appointed to the International Criminal Court. Mr. President, she began without preamble, I've received a formal request from the American government for the detention and extradition of Maya Taylor, an American citizen currently believed to be on Burkina soil. Traoré and Malik exchanged glances. The wheels were already in motion. On what charges? Traoré asked, though he suspected he already knew. Embezzlement, wire fraud, and flight to avoid prosecution. The documentation is quite comprehensive. Diallo placed a thick folder on his desk. I'm afraid we have no choice but to comply with the request. International law is clear on these matters. How convenient, Traoré said dryly, that this request arrived so quickly after Miss Taylor's arrival in our country. Diallo's expression didn't change. The timing is irrelevant, sir. The law is the law. After Diallo left, Traoré sat alone in his office, Maya's situation weighing heavily on his mind. Something about this entire scenario felt orchestrated, manipulated. In his years as a military officer and politician, he had developed strong instincts about when he was being played. His contemplation was interrupted by another knock. This time, it was Aicha Sankara, his director of communications, a brilliant young woman who had earned his complete trust over the past 3 years. Sir, I've been doing some digging into this Darius Monroe situation, she said, closing the door behind her, and I think there's something you need to know. She sat across from his desk and opened her laptop. Darius Monroe isn't just a hotel heir. His family's business empire includes interests in mining, arms trading, and private military contracting. 3 months ago, our intelligence services intercepted communications about a planned coup attempt. The funding was traced to a shell company owned by Monroe Industries. Traoré's blood ran cold. He was planning to overthrow my government? It appears so. But when that plan fell through, he needed a new way to destabilize Burkina Faso. Maya's arrival here was probably the perfect opportunity. You think he orchestrated her coming here? No, sir. I think her arrival was genuine, but I think he's using it as a weapon. If he can embarrass you internationally, make you look like a fool who can be manipulated by any attractive woman with a sob story, it undermines your credibility both domestically and abroad. Traoré leaned back in his chair, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place. And if I defend her, I look like I'm harboring a criminal. If I abandon her, I look weak and heartless. Exactly. It's a no-win situation, sir, unless... Unless what? Aicha's eyes brightened. Unless we prove that the charges against Maya are fabricated. If we can expose Monroe's manipulation, we turn the tables on him. And how do we do that? We start by finding out who else came to Ouagadougou on Monroe's jet. If my suspicions are correct, one of those passengers isn't who they claim to be. That evening, Maya sat in her assigned guest room, staring out at the palace gardens as the sun set over Ouagadougou. The events of the day felt surreal, from her bold declaration at the palace gates to the shocking news that Darius had followed her to Africa. A soft knock on her door interrupted her brooding. She opened it to find Traoré standing in the hallway, his formal presidential attire replaced by simple khaki pants and a white cotton shirt. He looked younger, more approachable, and undeniably handsome. "May I come in?" he asked. Maya stepped aside, and he entered, taking a seat in one of the chairs by the window. "I wanted to check on you. I know today has been overwhelming." "That's an understatement," Maya said, attempting a smile. "I came here with such clear intentions, such confidence in my decision. Now I feel like I've stumbled into someone else's nightmare." "Tell me about Darius," Traoré said gently. "Help me understand what kind of man we're dealing with." Maya sat across from him, gathering her thoughts. "When I first met him, he seemed perfect, charming, successful, generous. He swept me off my feet with expensive dates, exotic trips, thoughtful gifts. But gradually, I began to see the real man underneath." What changed? Control became more important to him than affection. He wanted to know where I was every moment, who I was talking to, what I was thinking. He isolated me from my friends, convinced me that my job wasn't worthy of someone in his social circle. He made me financially dependent on him, then used that dependence to manipulate me. Traoré's jaw tightened. He had seen this pattern before. Powerful. Men who treated women as possessions rather than partners. "The final straw came 3 weeks ago," Maya continued. "I overheard a phone conversation between Darius and his business partner. They were discussing their upcoming merger with a European hotel chain, and Darius said, 'Once I'm married to Maya, her connections at McKinsey will give us insider information on all our competitors' strategies.' He was using you for corporate espionage?" "Essentially, yes. I realized that our entire relationship had been calculated, that he had researched me and pursued me because I was useful to his business empire. I wasn't his fiancé. I was his asset. So you broke off the engagement." Maya nodded. "I left the ring on his desk with a note explaining that I couldn't marry someone who saw me as a business opportunity rather than a person. Then I took a leave of absence from work and spent 2 weeks trying to figure out what to do with my life. And that's when you decided to come to Burkina Faso. I had been following your story for months, watching videos of your speeches, reading about your policies. You represented everything Darius wasn't. Genuine, principled, dedicated to something bigger than yourself. The more I learned about you, the more I realized that you were the kind of man I wanted to spend my life with." Traoré was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. "Maya, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course. Did you ever have access to any of Darius's business accounts? Did you ever handle money or financial documents for him?" "Never," Maya replied immediately. "Darius was obsessively secretive about his business affairs. I wasn't even allowed in his home office. Why do you ask?" "Because he's accusing you of embezzling $5 million from his company. He has documentation that appears to show transfers made under your name." Maya's face went pale. "That's impossible. I never had access to any of his accounts. This has to be fabricated." "I believe you," Traoré said, and the relief in Maya's eyes was palpable. "But we need to prove it. And we need to understand why Darius is going to such elaborate lengths to destroy you." Before Maya could respond, there was an urgent knocking at the door. Traoré opened it to find Malik and Aicha standing in the hallway, both looking grim. "Sir, we have a situation," Malik announced. "Darius Monroe has called a press conference for tomorrow morning. He's claiming that Maya Taylor is a dangerous fugitive who has seduced you to avoid prosecution." "And there's more," Aicha added. "One of Monroe's associates, a man claiming to be a private investigator, has been meeting with Minister Diallo. They've been in discussions for over 2 hours." Traoré's eyes narrowed. "What kind of discussions?" "The kind that involve large briefcases and handshakes," Malik replied grimly. The implication was clear. Darius was bribing government officials to ensure Maya's extradition. Sir, Aicha said urgently, I think I may have found something. The private investigator. His name is Louis Fay. I did some research and he's not licensed in New York or any other state. But he is a known associate of several African dictators, specializing in fabricating evidence and manufacturing international incidents. You're saying the evidence against Maya is fake? I'm saying we need to find Louis Fay and get him to tell us the truth. If we can prove that Darius hired him to frame Maya, we can turn this entire situation around. Traoré stood up, his decision made. Where is Fay staying? The Hotel Splendid. Downtown. Room 412. Then that's where we're going. Sir, you can't leave the palace, Malik protested. The security risks are acceptable, Traoré finished firmly. Maya, you're coming with us. If we're going to clear your name, you need to hear the truth firsthand. Ibrahim, I can't ask you to risk. You're not asking, he interrupted gently. I'm choosing. There's a difference. As they prepared to leave the palace, Maya felt a surge of emotion she hadn't experienced in years, the feeling of being protected, valued, and believed in by someone who had no obligation to help her. For the first time since arriving in Burkina Faso, she began to believe that her leap of faith might actually pay off. At 11 o'clock that night, a nondescript Toyota Prado pulled up to the Hotel Splendid in downtown Ouagadougou. The hotel was a mid-range establishment that catered primarily to business travelers and aid workers, the kind of place where someone could stay without drawing attention. Traoré sat in the passenger seat, wearing civilian clothes and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Maya was in the back seat next to Aicha, while Malik drove. 2 additional security vehicles followed at a discreet distance. Remember, Aicha said as they parked, we need Fay to confess that he fabricated the evidence against Maya. Without that confession, we have nothing. Maya's hands trembled as she checked the small digital recorder Aicha had given her. What if he won't talk? What if he calls Darius the moment he sees me? Then we improvise, Traoré said with more confidence than he felt. But we won't know until we try. They made their way through the hotel's modest lobby, past a sleepy desk clerk who barely glanced up from his newspaper. The elevator carried them silently to the 4th floor, where the hallway was dimly lit and empty. Room 412 was at the end of the corridor. Traoré positioned himself out of sight while Maya approached the door. She took a deep breath and knocked. Room. Service, she called in French, disguising her voice slightly. The door opened, revealing a thin, nervous-looking man in his 50s with receding hair and darting eyes. Louis Fay looked exactly like what he was, a man who made his living in the shadows. I didn't order any, he began, then stopped when he saw Maya's face. You. Hello, Louis, Maya said, stepping forward before he could close the door. We need to talk. I don't know who you think I am, but you're Louis Fay and you work for Darius Monroe, Maya interrupted, and you've been very busy creating false evidence to frame me for embezzlement. Fay's eyes widened, and he tried to slam the door shut. But Traoré appeared suddenly, his tall frame filling the doorway. I think you'd better invite us in, he said calmly. Recognizing the president of Burkina Faso, Fay stumbled backward into his room. His laptop was open on the bed, surrounded by documents and photographs. Maya could see bank statements with her name on them, official-looking forms, and what appeared to be witness statements. Impressive work, Traoré observed, examining the forged documents. How much did Darius pay you for this? I don't know what you're talking about, Fay stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. Maya activated the recorder and set it on the bedside table. Louis, I know exactly what's happening here. Darius hired you to fabricate evidence that would make it look like I stole money from his company. The question is why you agreed to do it. You don't understand, Fay said, sinking into a chair. You don't know what kind of man Darius Monroe is. When he wants something done, it gets done, one way or another. What did he threaten you with? Traoré asked.
My daughter, Faye whispered. She lives in Paris with her mother. Monroe has connections everywhere, people who could make her life very difficult if I didn't cooperate.
So you created false bank accounts in Maya's name, Aicha prompted. Not false accounts, real accounts, but opened using her stolen identity. Monroe had someone break into her apartment months ago to get her personal information. The money transfers are real, but Maya never made them. It was all done remotely using her stolen credentials. Maya felt sick. How long has he been planning this? Since the day you broke off your engagement, Faye admitted. He called me that same afternoon. Said he had a job that required special discretion. And the witness statements? Traoré asked. Paid actors. Professional liars who will swear they saw Maya stealing money, accessing accounts she shouldn't. Have access to whatever the story requires.
Why?
Maya asked, her voice breaking. Why go to such elaborate lengths just to hurt me? Faye looked at her with something approaching pity. Because you humiliated him. Darius Monroe has never been rejected in his life. Every woman, every business deal, every acquisition, he always gets what he wants. When you walked away from him, you damaged his reputation and his ego. He couldn't let that stand. So he decided to destroy my life. Not just destroy it, control it. He wants you back, Maya, but he wants you broken first, desperate, grateful to him for rescuing you from the legal troubles he created. The room fell silent as the full scope of Darius's manipulation became clear. He hadn't just been trying to frame Maya. He had been orchestrating an elaborate psychological campaign designed to force her back into his control. There's something else, Faye continued reluctantly. The coup attempt that failed here 3 months ago? That was Monroe's operation too. When it didn't work, he started looking for other ways to destabilize President Traoré's government. Your arrival here was perfect timing, a way to make the president look foolish and distracted, while Monroe prepared his next move. What next move? Traoré demanded. I don't know all the details, but he's been meeting with opposition politicians, military officers, business leaders. He's spreading money around, making promises, building a coalition. A coalition for what? Another coup attempt. But this time, instead of using local rebels, he's planning to use economic warfare. Destabilize the currency, create artificial shortages, fund protests and strikes until the government collapses. Traoré's jaw clenched. Maya reached for his hand instinctively, and he didn't pull away. Louis, she said gently, will you help us stop him? How? If I testify against Monroe, my daughter will be protected, Traoré interrupted. I give you my word. If you help us expose Monroe's crimes, I will personally ensure that your daughter is safe. Faye looked between Maya and Traoré, seeing something in their faces that gave him hope for the first time in months. What do you need me to do? The next morning, Ouagadougou buzzed with anticipation as international journalists gathered at the Lyco Hotel for Darius Monroe's press conference. Word had spread quickly through media circles that the American billionaire had come to Africa to retrieve his fugitive fiancée, and the story had all the elements that made for compelling television. Wealth, power, international intrigue, and a beautiful woman caught in the middle. Darius stood behind a makeshift podium in the hotel's conference room, impeccably dressed in a navy blue suit that probably cost more than most Burkina Faso citizens made in a year. Cameras flashed as he adjusted his tie and prepared to address the assembled media. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to public speaking. I come before you today, not as a businessman or a public figure, but as a man who has been betrayed by someone he trusted. Completely. He paused for effect, allowing the cameras to capture his expression of wounded dignity. 3 weeks ago, I discovered that my fiancée, Maya Gabrielle Taylor, had systematically stolen over $5 million from my family's business enterprises. When I confronted her with the evidence, she fled, first disappearing from York, and now, as we have learned, seeking refuge with President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. Murmurs rippled through the crowd of journalists. Several hands shot up, but Darius raised his own to indicate he wasn't finished. I want to be clear. I harbor no ill will toward President Traoré. He is, by all accounts, an honorable man who has been deceived by a sophisticated criminal. Miss Taylor is an expert manipulator who has clearly convinced him that she is here for romantic reasons, when in fact she is simply a fugitive seeking protection from prosecution. A French journalist called out, "Mr. Monroe, do you have proof of these allegations?" Darius smiled coldly and gestured to his assistant, who began distributing folders to the assembled media. Bank statements, transfer records, security footage, witness statements, everything you need to verify that Maya Taylor is a thief who has fled justice. Meanwhile, back at the presidential palace, Traoré watched the press conference with growing anger. Maya sat beside him, her face pale but determined. They had spent the early morning hours working with Aicha to prepare their response, knowing that Darius would try to control the narrative from the beginning. "He's very convincing," Maya observed quietly. "If I didn't know the truth, I would believe him myself." "That's what makes him dangerous," Traoré replied. "He's had years of practice at manipulation." Malik entered the room, followed by Louis Fay. The private investigator looked nervous but resolved, clutching a briefcase full of evidence that would hopefully clear Maya's name. "Are you ready for this?" Traoré asked Fay. "As ready as I'll ever be," Fay replied. "But you need to understand, once I do this, there's no going back. Monroe will come after me with everything he has." "Then we'd better make sure our first strike counts," Aicha said grimly. At the Laco Hotel, Darius was fielding questions from the international press when his phone buzzed with an urgent message. He glanced at it discreetly, and his confident expression faltered for just a moment. The message was from an unknown number. "Louis Fay is no longer working for you. Press conference at the presidential palace in 1 hour. IT." Darius's jaw tightened, but he recovered quickly, flashing his trademark smile at the cameras. "I believe I have time for one more question," he announced. A BBC correspondent raised her hand. "Mr. Monroe, what is your relationship to the recent coup attempts in Burkina Faso? There are reports that your business interests have been funding destabilization efforts in the region." The question caught Darius off guard. This wasn't part of the script he had prepared. His smile became more forced. "I have no idea what you're referring to," he replied stiffly. "My business interests in Africa are limited to legitimate hotel development projects." "But sir," the correspondent pressed, "we have documents suggesting that shell companies linked to Monroe Industries have been—" "This press conference is about Maya Taylor's criminal activities," Darius interrupted sharply. "I won't be distracted by baseless conspiracy theories." He stepped away from the podium abruptly, his composure finally cracking. As he left the conference room, he pulled out his phone and dialed Louis Fay's number. The call went straight to voicemail. An hour later, the presidential palace's press room was packed with both local and international journalists. The same reporters who had attended Darius's press conference had rushed across town, sensing that the story was about to take an unexpected turn. President Traoré entered the room with his characteristic calm dignity, followed by Maya, Aicha, and Louis Fay. The sight of the private investigator caused several journalists to exchange glances. This was the man who had been vouching for Darius's evidence just hours earlier. "Thank you all for coming," Traoré began, his voice carrying easily through the room. "This morning you heard serious allegations made against Miss Maya Taylor, an American citizen who is currently a guest in our country. I am here to present evidence that these allegations are not only false, but part of an elaborate conspiracy to commit fraud." He gestured to Louis Fay, who stepped forward to the microphone. The man's hands shook slightly as he pulled out a prepared statement. "My name is Louis Fay," he began, his French accent thick with nervousness. For the past 3 weeks, I have been employed by Darius Monroe to fabricate evidence against Maya Taylor. I am here today to confess my role in this deception and to present proof of Mr. Monroe's criminal activities. The press room erupted in excited murmurs. Cameras flashed frantically as Faye continued. Mr. Monroe hired me to create false bank accounts using Miss Taylor's stolen identity information. The money transfers that appear to show her stealing from Monroe Industries were actually made by Monroe himself, using credentials obtained through illegal surveillance of Miss Taylor's private life. Faye opened his briefcase and began distributing documents. I have recordings of my conversations with Mr. Monroe, copies of the real bank records showing the actual source of the transferred funds, and evidence that the witness statements against Miss Taylor were provided by paid actors. Why are you coming forward now? Asked a journalist from CNN. Because Mr. Monroe threatened my daughter's safety to ensure my cooperation, Faye replied, his voice growing stronger. And because I could not stand by and watch an innocent woman be destroyed for the crime of refusing to marry a man she did not love. Maya stepped forward to the microphone, her voice clear and strong despite the emotional weight of the moment. 3 weeks ago, I ended my engagement to Darius Monroe because I discovered that he viewed me not as a partner, but as a business asset. When I refused to be used for corporate espionage, he decided to punish me in the most elaborate way possible. She looked directly into the cameras. I came to Burkina Faso not to escape justice, but to find something I had never experienced before: genuine love and respect. President Traoré has shown me what it means to be valued as a human being rather than as an object to be possessed. Traoré moved to stand beside her, a gesture that spoke volumes about where his loyalties lay. The evidence presented by Mr. Faye has been verified by our Financial Crimes Unit, he announced. We are prepared to share this evidence with American law enforcement so that they can pursue appropriate charges against Darius Monroe for fraud, identity theft, and criminal conspiracy. Furthermore, he continued, his voice taking on a harder edge, our intelligence services have uncovered evidence that Mr. Monroe has been financing attempts to destabilize our government through economic warfare and political manipulation. These activities constitute acts of aggression against the sovereignty of Burkina Faso. A journalist from Le Monde raised her hand. Mr. President, what is your response to those who say that Miss Taylor has manipulated you for political protection? Traoré's expression softened as he looked at Maya. Miss Taylor came to me with nothing but honesty and courage. She could have hidden in any number of countries with no extradition treaties. Instead, she chose to come here and face whatever consequences awaited her. That is not the action of someone seeking to manipulate. That is the action of someone seeking truth. And your personal feelings toward Miss Taylor, pressed another journalist, are exactly that. Personal, Traoré replied firmly. But I will say this. In my 5 years as president and 15 years in public service, I have never met anyone with more integrity, intelligence, and genuine compassion than Maya Taylor. Any country would be fortunate to have her as a citizen, and any man would be blessed to have her as a partner. The press conference continued for another 30 minutes, with Faye providing detailed explanations of how he had fabricated the evidence and Maya answering questions about her relationship with Darius and her reasons for coming to Burkina Faso. As the session concluded, Aicha whispered to Traoré, "Sir, we're receiving reports that Darius Monroe is trying to leave the country. His jet has been preparing for departure." "Not if I can help it," Traoré replied grimly. Within hours of the press conference, the story had spread across international news networks. The narrative had completely shifted from American fugitive seduces African president to billionaire businessman exposed in elaborate revenge scheme. Social media erupted with support for Maya and condemnation of Darius's manipulative tactics. But Darius Monroe was not a man who accepted defeat easily. As his private jet sat on the tarmac at Ouagadougou Airport, he paced in the cabin like a caged animal, his phone pressed to his ear. "I don't care what it costs," he snarled into the device. "I want every favor called in, every connection activated. There has to be a way to salvage this situation." His assistant, a nervous young man named Bradley, cleared his throat hesitantly. "Sir, the airport authorities are refusing to approve our flight plan. They say there are irregularities with our diplomatic papers." Darius's eyes blazed with fury. "What kind of irregularities?" "They won't say, sir, but they've impounded our passports pending a full investigation." Before Darius could explode, his phone rang. The caller ID showed an international number he didn't recognize. "Monroe," he answered curtly. "Mr. Monroe, this is Inspector Jean-Claude Ouedraogo of the Burkina Faso Financial Crimes Unit. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and economic crimes against the state. I suggest you surrender yourself peacefully." Darius ended the call and immediately tried to contact his lawyers in New York. But as the hours passed, he discovered that his legal troubles were multiplying faster than he could address them. The FBI had opened an investigation into his business practices based on evidence provided by the Burkina Faso government. Several of his business partners were distancing themselves from Monroe Industries. Stock prices for his publicly traded companies were plummeting as investors fled. Most damaging of all, other women had begun coming forward with stories of Darius's manipulative and controlling behavior. The Me Too movement, which had been relatively quiet in recent months, suddenly found new energy as Maya's story inspired others to speak out. Back at the presidential palace, Maya sat in the gardens as the sun set over Ouagadougou, reflecting on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. Just 48 hours earlier, she had been a desperate woman taking an impossible gamble. Now she was at the center of an international scandal that was reshaping conversations about power, manipulation, and justice. Traoré found her there, 2 cups of tea in his hands. "Ataya," he said, offering her one of the cups. "Traditional, West African tea. I thought you might like to try something authentically Burkina Faso." Maya accepted the tea gratefully, inhaling its aromatic blend of green tea, mint, and sugar. "It's delicious, thank you." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "Ibrahim," Maya said finally, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Always. Do you believe that I came here for the right reasons? Or do you think deep down that I was just a desperate woman running from her problems?" Traoré set down his tea and turned to face her fully. "Maya, in my culture, we have a saying. The river that flows toward the sea knows its destination even when the path is unclear. I believe you came here because something deeper than conscious thought was guiding you. You don't think it was crazy, foolish, presumptuous?" "I think it was brave," he said simply. "The bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do." Maya felt tears welling in her eyes. "I was so afraid that once you learned the truth about my past, about Darius and everything that happened, you would see me differently." "I do see you differently," Traoré admitted, and Maya's heart sank for a moment. "I see you as even stronger, more remarkable than I initially thought. You survived years of psychological manipulation by a man who specializes in breaking people's spirits. You recognized the truth of your situation and found the courage to escape it. And when he tried to destroy you for leaving him, you faced him with dignity and grace." "I couldn't have done any of it without you," Maya said softly. "You believed in me when I barely believed in myself." That's what partners do for each other. The word partners hung in the air between them, loaded, with possibility and promise. "Ibrahim," Maya began carefully, "I know that my arrival here created an impossible situation for you. I know that being associated with me has brought you nothing but trouble and complications. If you think it would be better for me to return,
To America now that my name has been cleared. Maya, he interrupted gently. Do you want to return to America? No, she answered immediately. There's nothing for me there anymore. My job, my apartment, my friends, none of it feels real anymore. The only place I want to be is here with you. But I know that's asking a lot. Traoré reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. 3 days ago, if someone had told me that my life was about to be turned upside down by an extraordinary woman from New York, I would have thought they were insane. But sometimes the most unexpected events lead to the most important discoveries. What kind of discoveries? That perhaps I've been so focused on serving my country that I forgot to serve my own heart. That maybe it's possible to be both a president and a man in love. That the woman I've been waiting for my entire life might be brave enough to travel halfway around the world to find me. Maya's breath caught. Are you saying? I'm saying that I would be honored if you would consider staying in Burkina Faso. Not as my guest, not as someone seeking refuge, but as my partner in every sense of the word. You want me to marry you? Maya whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. I want you to marry me, Traoré confirmed, his voice strong and certain. I want you to be my wife, my advisor, my closest friend, my greatest love. I want us to build a life together that honors both of our cultures and serves something greater than ourselves. Maya threw her arms around his neck, tears streaming down her face. Yes, she said through her sobs. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. As they held each other in the gathering darkness, both knew that their journey together was just beginning. There would be challenges ahead, cultural differences to navigate, political pressures to withstand, a relationship to build from the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. But they also knew something else, that sometimes love really does conquer all, that courage is rewarded, and that the most impossible dreams can come true when two people are willing to fight for them together. 6 months later, Maya Taylor became Maya Traoré in a wedding ceremony that blended American and Burkinabe traditions, attended by dignitaries from around the world and broadcast live to millions of viewers who had followed their remarkable love story. Darius Monroe, meanwhile, was serving a 15-year sentence in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. His business empire had collapsed, his reputation was in ruins, and his attempts to manipulate and control had ultimately led to his own destruction. But for Maya and Ibrahim, the past was simply that, past. Their future stretched ahead of them, bright with possibility and built on the strongest foundation of all. Genuine love, mutual respect, and the courage to believe that sometimes the most impossible dreams are simply dreams that haven't come true yet. As President Traoré often said in the years that followed, the woman who traveled 6,000 miles to propose to me taught me that love is not about possession or control. It's about partnership, trust, and the willingness to build something beautiful together. And Maya, now fluent in French and Moore, beloved by the people of Burkina Faso for her work with women's education and healthcare initiatives, would always remember that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the courage to take an impossible leap of faith. Their love story became legend, not because it was perfect, but because it proved that real love, the kind that changes everything, is worth any risk, any sacrifice, any challenge that stands in its way. 5 years after Maya's dramatic arrival at the presidential palace, she stood on the same steps where their journey had begun, watching her husband address a crowd of international dignitaries gathered for the inauguration of the Maya Traoré Center for Women's Leadership, a world-class institution that would train the next generation of female leaders from across Africa. In her arms she held their 18-month-old daughter, Aminata, named for Ibrahim's first wife with Maya's blessing. The little girl had her father's intelligent eyes and her mother's determined spirit. "Mama," Aminata babbled, reaching for Maya's face. Yes, my darling, Maya whispered, kissing her daughter's forehead. Mama's here. As Ibrahim concluded his speech and the crowd erupted in applause, Maya reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come to Burkina Faso as a desperate woman seeking love. She had found not just love, but purpose, family, and a home where her dreams could flourish. The woman who had once felt like a possession to be traded now stood as First Lady of a nation, a voice for women's rights across Africa, and proof that sometimes the most impossible dreams are simply dreams that require impossible courage. Ibrahim joined her on the steps, slipping his arm around her waist and kissing both his wife and daughter. Any regrets? He asked with a smile, the same question he had posed on their wedding day. Maya looked out at the crowd, at the center that bore her name, at the country that had become her home, and at the man who had believed in her when she barely believed. In herself. Only one? She replied, with a mischievous grin. Ibrahim's eyebrows rose. What's that? That I waited so long to buy that plane ticket to Ouagadougou. As their laughter mingled with little Aminata's giggles, the story that had begun with an impossible proposal continued to unfold, a testament to the power of love, the importance of courage, and the magic that happens when two people are brave. Enough to believe that their dreams are worth fighting for. The end.